The story matters. Don't hide the ugly chapter when you hit rock bottom and your whole world is shattered.
Well, where do I start with this story? The story of my pit. And I guess we all have them, pits. Everybody's pit looks different. I was lucky enough to pre-read a copy of Ben's book, and let me tell you, he did a fine job of describing what pits are like and what they feel like and who experiences them and how they shame you and how they define you, at least for a little while. I guess the thing with pits is, you feel like they're the lowest point of your life, and it's when you've lost the most and when you've hurt the most people and when you're the brokest and when the people you love have given up on you. But here's the thing about pits. Although we may have gotten ourselves into the pit, it's often in the pit that we find that God's doing the most and the biggest things through our pits. It's in those times of despair and chaos that God is forcing us out of our comfort zone, and he's knocking us off balance on purpose. At least that's what I found. I knew from the time that I was young that I wanted to preach. I never really had a problem standing up in front of people and talking, and I, for the most part, had always loved the church. People had respect for preachers and preaching, and when I was growing up, and I always had a God conscience as far back as I can remember. I never really doubted the existence of God, and I wanted to spend the rest of my life explaining him from the Bible. Now, I was probably anything but the perfect kid. For the most part, I was a pretty good kid, and I ended up at Southeastern Seminary. Now, when you attend Southeastern Seminary, this was my college years, you have to sign a covenant, which is basically a list of things saying that you won't look at bad stuff on the internet, you won't drink alcohol, and you won't use tobacco products, and you won't fornicate, etc., etc. And I was thinking, okay, no problem, got it. Well, right around 2009, 2010, I got introduced to a few preachers that really blew me away. Mark Driscoll, Matt Chandler, the whole Acts 29 crew. If you're in those circles, you may know what I'm talking about. They were preaching fire sermons, 1 hour long, but without all of the legalism and the fundamentalist talk of traditional Southern Baptists, and it was so eye-opening to me. The gospel that they preached was so pure and so clean, and it was so unworks-based. It made sense to me. It really aligned what I knew about the Bible with the religion that I claimed to believe. And it was so magnetic to my soul that I just clung to those guys. Well, these guys talked, about some edgy stuff. They were up there preaching in flannels and blue jeans and beards, and they had iPads, and it was just totally not this, Adrian Rogers type Jerry Vines crowd that I was used to. And they talked about drinking beer, and they talked about smoking cigars every once in a while, and they talked about watching UFC fights. And I sort of felt like I had found my crowd. You know what I mean? Like, if you've ever heard the story of the ugly duckling who found out that he was a goose the whole time, and then he finally found the geese, and he knew he was with his people. That's how I felt with those guys. And let me give a brief disclaimer here, because what happened in my mind, this theological perspective, it didn't open up the door that would become my pit. My sin did that. In fact, I still love and I appreciate those guys clarifying the gospel of grace by faith and not by works, and I still preach it. What those guys started in me was a good and right psychological movement. It started a momentum, a theological shift, an alignment, really sort of a calibration of spiritual things that went on in my life. And my lack of immaturity couldn't handle it. And I just want to say, I'm not throwing those guys under the bus. It wasn't their fault. In fact, I still love and appreciate and believe in exactly what they taught. So back in 2008, I had gastric bypass surgery. My whole life I had struggled with my weight tremendously, and I finally decided to have a surgical intervention, and I'd do it again to this day. However, at Duke University Hospital, where I had it done, we had to take a series of classes on how our lives would be after this surgery. And one of the changes that they said that we could never do again is to drink alcohol. Because what would happen is alcohol and most things would basically bypass your stomach or your guts, and it would dump right into your intestines. That's my dog scratching, if you can hear Dolly. So it would, whatever you drink would go right into your bloodstream. That was about a 30-minute class one night that I can hardly remember. But little did I know that this fact would become the defining characteristic of my life for the next decade plus. And I remember the first time I drank a Pepsi after gastric bypass, a couple weeks after that, and it hit me like rocket fuel. All that sugar and all that caffeine dumped right into my bloodstream, and I remember dancing around our kitchen. It was crazy. I can remember that moment. I can take you to the square inch where it happened in that house. Meanwhile, my love for these rebellious preacher types was just growing and growing. And I consumed their sermons for years. I read their books. I drank all of their Kool-Aid. And I don't really know how to describe it, but they had a particular edge on them that made the gospel come alive. Like IMAX, surround sound, 3D. These guys were it. They were rock stars to me. And this is what I wanted more than anything. Preaching heavy 1-hour sermons in, again, just a regular dress clothes and boots, and have a beard and take your iPad and just let it rip, tater chip. Like, that's what I wanted to do. And these guys' churches were booming, and this is it. In a weird way, this is going to sound so strange. In a weird way, that message of freedom in the gospel, again, through my lack of understanding, combined with the surgical procedure that I had, opened a portal for me that I did not know that I was going to go down. Now, I don't remember when I had my first alcoholic drink after gastric bypass. I've tried to remember it, but I can't. It had to be somewhere around 2011. But what I do remember is what alcohol did to me. And I remember how little it took. Because that alcohol went straight into my bloodstream. And I drank some growing up here and there, parties, when I was 16, 18, whatever. And 6, 8, 10 beers, And now it would take one airplane bottle would do to me what it used to take all night long to do when I was growing up. Scary fast. Like a bullet shot. Now, I was in full-time ministry. I was married. I had 2 kids. I was still in seminary. And I found myself beginning to crave one drink after another. In AA, they call it the obsession. I would sit around wondering where the next drink was going to come from and how I was going to get it. I remember preaching at a youth group camp one time in 2012. I didn't take any booze with me when I preached this youth group camp, but I didn't know what it would be like to experience any withdrawals. I didn't know I had any problems. But on about day 2, I started to feel bad, like I had gotten the flu. I had cold, I had shakes, I had dry heaves. I had no idea what was going on. And I actually, from this youth group camp, I drove myself to the urgent care, and they treated me for a tick bite because I found a tick on myself. And it wasn't just like a crawling tick that I just flicked off. But I told them that, and they said, well, it must have bitten you. We're going to treat you for a tick bite. Looking back, I know exactly what it was. It was alcohol withdrawals. I had every symptom of it. Fast forward to October 2013. For me, I call that my D-Day. That's when it all really came to light, because I was drinking in the morning like I always did, and I ended up getting my first DWI. I was working a second job with one of our deacons in the church. I was driving his company truck. I had my 2-year-old daughter in the truck. I had a loaded pistol in the truck. And to make it all worse, this happened around noon. And about an hour after I got pulled over, they took me to the police station, and I blew in their thing, and I was triple the legal limit, excuse me, of what's allowed for a DUI. So I was in bad shape. And to make it worse, because I had my daughter in the truck and I got a DUI, I was charged with a misdemeanor child abuse charge. And that meant mandatory jail time. I wore an ankle monitor that monitored my alcohol levels for 4 months, just so that I would only have to do 10 days in jail and not 30 days in jail. I did that 10 days. It came and went. And I want to be clear here in this part of my story. There are a lot of details and a lot of names that I'm leaving out on purpose, not because they're not important, but because I can only tell my story how I remember it. And it may other people may remember it differently, and it's not my job to tell their story. I found out in recovery that's often the case. So anyway, so I got to Southeastern for my next class. This was like the next day after I'd gotten bailed out of jail, and I get a notification on my phone. I have an email from the dean of students, and he wants to see me. So I go to his office, and he slides my mugshot across the table, and he says, "Is this you?" And of course it is, and so I say it is, and excuse me, he's very gracious, but he did what he had to do. And he let me know that I had broken that covenant that I had signed, and that I was on academic suspension or probation or whatever they called it for a year, and that I could reapply later and I could finish my degree. I was 4 classes away from graduating with an MDiv in expository preaching. And it's funny because I had a big project for class due that very same day. And this dean of students, Dr. Liederbach, was such a great guy, so cool. He actually let me go to that next class and do my presentation with all that work that I had just done. Even though he had just kicked me out of seminary, he still let me go to my next class and finish that project. Just a great guy. Just looking back on it, was one of the coolest things. But, I didn't want my whole life to turn into a dumpster fire, but I couldn't stop drinking. All I wanted to do was drink, like my body didn't feel right without alcohol in it. I wasn't drinking to get drunk anymore. I was drinking to feel normal. I didn't plan on getting DWIs. I didn't plan on going to rehabs. I didn't plan on getting divorces. I didn't plan on living in 2 halfway houses. I didn't plan on all this jail time. I just wanted to feel normal, but I didn't have any landing gear. Like, I would start drinking and it would just always end in absolute devastation every single time. And everyone had basically had enough. I mean, this is around 2013, 2014. The church I was working for, you can imagine, a Southern Baptist church has a youth pastor with a child abuse charge and a DWI. I mean, that doesn't fly. My wife at the time, she had had enough, so we just packed up and moved home. We quit everything, we moved home. Now, the only difference between being a drunk in Raleigh, where I was at, and being a drunk in Denver, North Carolina, where I am now, the only difference is the location. No matter where I was, there I was. I couldn't get away from me. It wasn't long before I burned all of those bridges down too when I got here, and eventually I went to my first 30-day treatment facility in Georgia. It was called Black Bear. I got out of Black Bear, it's 2015. I made it almost a month before I was back off the deep end. I was worse than ever. I ended up going back to Black Bear again that fall. I got out, I made it almost a week, and I was back to the races again, out running and gunning. This was, again, 2015. Excuse me. I got my second DWI, aggravated level 1 DWI, not far after that. And I was granted my license back. It was weird because I got my DWI, I went to Lincoln County Jail. They gave me my license back until my hearing, until they could prove that I was guilty of a DWI. And a month after I got my second DWI, on those temporary license, I caught my third DWI living at a halfway house when I got drunk. I picked up a 30-day chip, of sobriety, went out from that halfway house in that truck, got drunk that night, got kicked out of the halfway house, and caught my third DWI on the way home. And they put me in Gaston County Jail and let me sit. They laid me down for 6 months. I was in Gaston County Jail thinking about what I had done. So I got out of jail, and I hadn't drank in 6 months. I decided to get into my wrecked truck at my mom and dad's house. They had gone to a high school football game. I decided to get into my wrecked truck and go to the store and get some more booze. I guess I hadn't had enough pain. I got home and I got smashed. My parents found me passed out on the steps going down to the basement. They kicked me out. I winded up in a hotel, in a series of hotels in different places in Gastonia for about 2 weeks. Drinking, smoking, bar hopping, calling Ubers. I had one change of clothes and they stunk. I had peed in the bed. And the worst part is that the vodka wasn't working anymore. I couldn't get drunk. I was hurting. I had found my pit. Now, the thing about pits is a pit isn't the presence of pain. A pit is the absence of hope. And that's where I was. Totally without hope. I got on my knees beside that bed at that hotel room in Gastonia, and I asked God to either take me or take the booze, because I couldn't do it anymore. And that was on December the 4th, 2016. And in that moment, God didn't meet me in a sanctuary. God didn't meet me going down the car listening to K-Love, going down the road in the car listening to K-Love. He met me as a drunk in a hotel room in Gastonia, North Carolina. And he took it away. But here I was, a guy 4 classes away from graduating seminary, beside a hotel room as a drunk who had lost everything. Now, everybody's heard of stories of, junkies and drunkies who get sober and then go on to have incredible dynamic ministries. Mine's different because I was in the middle of having an incredible dynamic ministry when I burned it to the ground with alcohol. So I didn't have a low point that ended in a high point. I had a high point that really just nosedived. But thankfully, God held all the aces and not the devil. Not everyone had given up on me. My mama, for one. My best friend, Kim, who you could probably see in the background there. You know the story, what's going to happen there. They never gave up on me, and God never gave up on me. My mama would pray, Kim would pray, and God would listen and take action. And I'm so thankful for them because, after about 2 years of being sober, after that December the 4th date, I convinced her to marry me, and we've had a great marriage and a wonderful time ever since. And what God did in the years following December the 4th, 2016 is too much to fit into a 3-hour documentary, but I'll give you a little bit of the highlight reel. Number one, I already mentioned that I married my best friend, Kim. We tied the knot on 8/18/18. That's us right there. After about 2 years of being sober, she finally started believing me. My kids and I, we have an awesome relationship. They're happy now. They trust. The trust has been rebuilt between us. As I make this video right now, I just passed 9 years of sobriety. 9 years. I don't use alcoholic mouthwash. You can tell I've got a little bit of a cold right now. There is NyQuil in this house that has alcohol in it. I won't touch it. I'd rather have a cold. I don't do anything, period, with any alcohol in it whatsoever. It's just not worth it to me. I've had the chance to make amends with those that I've hurt along the way through letters or phone calls or conversations. One of the best parts about this whole journey that God's brought me out of this pit is there's a little church in Huntersville who needed a pastor, and they called me to preach for them as a supply pastor or supply preacher, a fill-in preacher in 2022. I got there and I told them up front, y'all, look, I've got some stuff you can probably Google. You know, I'm still on the radar. I'm still radioactive, so to speak. So just know who you're getting. And I told them the good, the bad, and the ugly. And they loved us. And they gave me a chance to preach again. And recently, they just asked me to stay. And I'm pretty sure that the pastor search committee just quit looking for another pastor. So if you're online, if you're on Facebook, you can go to Lake Haven Community Church in Huntersville, and you can see us on there. We're there. I preach every Sunday. I love it. So God's given me a restored, wonderful marriage. God's given me a beautiful relationship with my kids again. God's given me a fantastic career that I would have never been in if I hadn't been in recovery. And God has given me back fully and beyond a ministry greater than I could have ever imagined. And that's just in this short little amount of time. You know, my pit that used to define me in God's hands has been weaponized to help reach people who thought they were totally unique. Someone once said, if we were to all sit around in a circle and confess our sins to one another, we would laugh for the lack of originality. Think about that. Do you have any idea how many people I've been able to reach for the kingdom because God brought me through something? You think ministry is ruined because of something, some sin, some addiction? And sometimes formal ministry may be difficult to recover, but I didn't ask to preach again. I didn't think I would ever be qualified to lead a church. But what I found is that the church is full of real people who experience real stuff and want a real pastor who teaches them how to go to war with the darkness because he has gone to war with the darkness himself. If God gives me until December the 4th, 2026, this year, it'll be a decade since I was on my knees in that hotel room in Gastonia. God has reached more people in that time through my pit, through my brokenness, than he did when I was pretending to be a polished, theologically proper, card-carrying man of the cloth. It was in the nitty-gritty crowd of drunks I got sober with that I found my real tribe. And I say this in meetings all the time. I say it during my sermons. I say it everywhere I'm allowed to speak. Excuse me. I would rather be in a room full of drunkies and junkies who know that they need God than in a sanctuary full of people who think that God needs them. I hope as you read his book, you'll see the way that Ben highlights the same Bible verses that I clung to, the same characters that I related to, the same hope that was birthed out of darkness. Your pit may be part of your experience, but your pit doesn't have to be what defines you. Let it shape you and let God use it to further his kingdom.